All right, you guys. I worked it out. I worked it out. Hey, what's going on, my BK Riders? So, I'm gonna start over from where I left off at, and I'm watching this this broadcast, and I'm like, I want to share with you guys because some of the things that is going on in the world is like, are you serious? Are you serious? That is my word for the day. Are you serious? Because there is no way possible this can be going on the way it is. I don't understand. I don't understand at all, at all, at all. So, I'm going to show you guys some of the clips of what's been going on. I'm going to speak to you guys in the chat so I don't disturb the broadcast, but I will constantly give you my opinion as to what we're hearing and what we are seeing. Okay. So, this is about the impeachment of Trump. So, like, what is the argument about?
Rebels celebrated a victory in the Congress, thinking that the American people, through the Congress, actually supported them. We have to be responsible in our rhetoric on this floor and what we stand for. Many in this body favor asking our partners around the world to step up and do more to help protect our shared interests. The president has called on other nations to take on the burden of defeating terrorism in the Middle East and has commended our partners for their contributions to regional security. Sharing this burden of collective security interests is really vital to ensuring the United States is not the only one bearing the costs in blood and treasure, for we have borne way too much in the Middle East. But these arms sales are where the rubber hits the road for burden sharing. We cannot ask our partners to take on additional burdens while withholding from them the tools to do so. We should and do work with our partners to train them to use U.S. origin equipment effectively and responsibly. This is an ongoing process. Sales. But when members place indefinite holds on sales and place a stop to one ability to share burdens with our partners for 18 months in some cases, it undermines our entire security strategy and the important bilateral partnerships we've worked so hard to establish and grow. For that reason, I oppose the resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
May I ask how much time I have?
Gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
One
Okay,
minute.
then I yield myself the remainder of my time to close debate on this measure. I'll wrap up quickly as we have two more of these measures to consider. It's important that we pass this measure now, along with the two we'll soon consider, because these deal with the weapons that could soon be on their way across the ocean. Look, I think the Iranian regime is dangerous. I think the Houthis are dangerous. No one is denying the Saudis the right to go after them. What we're saying is don't go after them and kill thousands of civilians in the process with American weapons. And also separation of powers. The president cannot try to get around Congress with phony emergencies. And I yield back. I urge a yes vote.
AKA fake news.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. All
Fake
time for
news.
debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 491. The previous question ordered on the joint resolution. The question is on the third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution provided for congressional disapproval of the proposed transfer to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Kingdom of Spain, and the Italian Republic of certain defense articles and services.
The question is on the passage of the joint resolutions. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The joint resolution is passed
Mr.
without
Speaker?
objection. The motion from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I request the yeas and the nays.
Gentleman from Texas has requested the yeas and nays. Those in favor.
What that means when he said that they requested the yays and the nays, that means he want to know who opposed him, who said yes and who said no. Why is that? Why is he requesting the yays and nays? He want to actually know the person, as in the Senate, that said yes or no.
Favoring the vote by the yes and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Section 3 of House Resolution 491, I call up Senate Joint Resolution 37 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 37, joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed export to the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the Republic of France of certain defense articles and services.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the joint resolution is considered read. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, and the gentleman from Illinois, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, during consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include in the record extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection,
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
gentleman is recognized. Mr. Engel.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The second resolution we're debating is very similar to the first, but in this case, it would nullify the administration's phony emergency being used to transfer 60,000 precision-guided bombs to the United Arab Emirates. That's on top of the
Did you guys hear what he said? 60,000? 60,000 bombs? Wow.
40,000 we estimate the Emiratis already have on hand. I won't rehash the same argument, but I would like to make a point why, when we see what's going on in Yemen, it's so important for the United States to take a stand. Mr. Speaker, one of the things the Foreign Affairs Committee has focused on this year is trying to put American values back at the center of our foreign policy: democracy, human rights, the rule of law.
Wait a minute. Do you not see the senator behind them falling asleep? Like, are you serious right now? Are you really getting ready to fall asleep?
Frankly, this administration has acted like it cannot be burdened with these fundamental things that make America America. It just boggles the mind. Any great country can throw its weight around, but we're not China. We're not Russia. Our foreign policy should show the world the character of our country, our compassion, our belief that people everywhere should be able to live prosperously, productively, and have healthy lives. These ideas go hand in hand with promoting our security. We want more stable, secure countries and communities. Democratic countries are stronger partners for the United States on the world stage. And if we're serious about those values, it means speaking out when we see them trampled, whether they're trampled by an adversary or by a friend. When we turn our back on these ideals, when we strip the word democracy out of the State Department's mission statement, when we look the other way when friendly regimes carry out horrific human rights abuses, when we slash investments in the diplomacy and development efforts that help us build bridges of friendship and understanding, when we walk away from all that, what signal does it send to the world? What does it say about the sort of behavior that we're willing to tolerate? I've supported our partners and our partnerships in the Gulf region. I think they're an important counterbalance to the threat Iran poses. And I recognize that our partners face real threats from Iranian-backed Houthis who are themselves guilty.
So that doesn't mean that we should look away. But we should not supply an enemy to fire upon another enemy or ally. We should not do. It's like so crazy. You know, I believe something very big is about to happen. Something very big is about to happen that we can't take back. We, as in United States of America. Because, you know, I have issues with the word WE. So, I'm not going to play all of this. I'm going to fast forward it to the parts that I wanted you guys to hear.
Perpetrated by our partners. It doesn't.
The Saudi-led coalition to defeat the Houthi rebels, Congress has debated the president's exercise of the emergency clause of the Arms Export Control Act.
This joint resolution of disapproval, along with 21 other JRDs, intends to stop transfers to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. SJ Res 37 specifically blocks the transfer of Paveway precision-guided munitions to the United Arab Emirates. This technology converts dumb bombs, like the ones used by Russia to kill innocent men, women, and children in Syria, into precision-guided munitions, ones that are intended to avoid civilian casualties. We can debate whether shipments that aren't ready to be delivered require an emergency declaration, but at the end of the day, some of the munitions that we are discussing today have already left the shores of the United States and are en route to the UAE. In fact, the first tranche is en route now, and the second...
Look at him. Look at him. Come up there, unclean, shaven, looking dirty, in a $2,000 suit, talking about, oh, this is for educational purposes, copyrights intended for educational purposes for those people who don't speak the language of our government, who don't speak and understand the language of our government. Ain't nutcases. I have to say hi to my baby girl online. Hey, girl.
Tranche will be leaving in September. Mr. Speaker, this JRD and the two up for debate today are not about timelines for shipment. What we have heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle argue that these arms could be used in Yemen to target civilians. Yet there are reports that the UAE has already withdrawn from Yemen. The UAE serves as a bulwark against Iranian aggression, the ongoing threat of al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups wishing to harm the United States, our allies, and our interests. In contrast, the Iranian-backed Houthis, through missiles and UAV strikes, are a threat to stability in the region. Iran and the forces it supports, like the Houthis, are a threat to our national security and the security of our allies.
Number one contributor to human suffering. When you say human suffering, we're talking about just no respect for human life. For human life, there's no respect.
We've seen the Iranian regime threaten international shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, including ships belonging to the UK, Japan, and Norway. They've shot down an expensive American military asset flying in international airspace. Prior to the president's emergency declaration, the head of Iran's Quds Force called on terror groups to prepare for a proxy war with the United States and our allies. Since then, we've seen proxies be emboldened in their actions. Yet we are here today debating arms sales to the UAE on the basis that these arms transfers may be used by our strategic ally in Yemen. While there's no guarantee that these weapons will ever be used in Yemen, will ever not be used in Yemen either, there are facts that show exactly why we must continue to provide these arms to the UAE. As a former Air Force pilot and a current pilot in the Air Guard, I'm proud that our government would not send our Air Force to fly sorties without munitions needed to defend themselves. Similarly, we should not have an ally flying our F-16s without the necessary tools it needs to complete its mission. The Iranians have shown that they have the capacity and ability to fire upon military aircraft with no regard for whether the platform is manned or unmanned. When our allies are in a dogfight, we can't leave them without the means to defend themselves and our shared interests. And I also want to point out, there's a lot of discussion about offensive or defensive weapons. A bomb can be used defensively or offensively. I can't think of many weapons that are actually defensive in nature because they are used to destroy an enemy. So it's all about how you employ that weapon. Saying that we want to send only defensive weapons shows our allies to be weak against an Iran that has shown that it wants to go on the offensive continually. And I can name basically every country in the Middle East and show Iranian influences there. On the broader picture, we have got to debate how this went out. I fully agree with everybody on that. But we cannot leave our allies in a lurch. We cannot leave them unprotected because our big chief enemy is Iran. I know there's broad-based agreement on that, and we cannot show weakness in the eyes of that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll reserve the balance.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, a senior member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and thank him for his leadership on this and many other issues. And I rise today in opposition to SJ Resolution 37, which would prevent the transfer of Paveway precision-guided munitions to the United Arab Emirates. There are numerous reasons to oppose this resolution. Let me list three. First, and most obviously, some Paveways have already left the U.S., and this fact alone shows that this resolution is more about messaging than action and demonstrates the urgent need the UAE has for these munitions. Second, the UAE is a steadfast partner against Iran. Tehran is our foremost opponent in the region right now and a critical threat to our interests there. And I would note that the very flawed Iran deal put...
You heard what he said, to our interests there. What interest? Tell the people the truth. Tell the people the truth. We all know what those areas are rich in. We know what they rich in. Why don't you just tell the people the truth? What interest? What interest do we have over there? Tell us. Tell us.
Millions, and in fact billions and billions of dollars in cash into the pockets of Iran, and they're now using those dollars to support terrorism, to foment instability, to put mines on ships and attack ships in international waters. So they're now a threat not just in the region, but a threat around the world. So thank God President Trump had the good sense to get us out of that terrible deal. If we want the UAE's continued help, we need to ensure that we are a reliable partner and that they are properly armed. And the third item is that the U.S. needs to continue its leadership in the region. If the UAE and Saudi Arabia cannot buy arms from us, that doesn't mean they won't get arms. It just means that...
They want us to be the supplier. Absolutely, very hard. They want us to be the supplier. They know they can buy these weapons from other places and fire upon our unmanned drones and our military, but they want us, as in United States, because you know it's a we, us, them, they kind of situation. Really?
Buy them from the Russians. This will diminish our standing, weaken our leverage with our partners, and call into question our reliability as a partner. For these reasons and really others, I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution. I thank the gentleman for yielding and yield back my time.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from Illinois reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Is the gentleman prepared to close?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I yield myself the remainder of the time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Well, thanks again, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend on the other side of the aisle, and it's a good debate here. But bottom line on this, I think if the concern is Saudi Arabia, I understand the concern. I may not share it in the same level of depth, but then vote no on the last resolution, or vote for the last resolution. This one's on UAE. And whether it's Saudi, UAE, or Jordan, I think it's important for us, Mr. Speaker, to constantly show that we have our allies back, especially an ally like UAE. We know that Iran likes to go on the offensive. We know that the only thing that stops Iran from broader encroachments in the Middle East is the United States and our allies. And we know that a good offensive posture is the best defensive posture to prevent a shooting war from ever happening. So again, we can all debate the process, how this went down. But the bottom line is we must reject this resolution. This is a resolution that I think is a result of political pressure, and we must send this back to the Senate where it belongs, or if this passes, I'm sure the president will veto it. So with that, Mr. Speaker, again, thank you for everybody in the debate, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, let me say I certainly respect my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for the points they raised. We have similar concerns, but I think the way we handle it, or the way we propose to handle it, is a little bit different. And that's why I'm saying if we don't pass this measure, these bombs will be on their way to the Emirates very soon. If we do pass this resolution, it will go to the president's desk, and it will put him on the spot to answer whether he agrees that our values need to be central to America's work around the world. Again, I am very concerned and aware of the malign role that the Iranians play in the region. I am very concerned about the Houthis, who also play a bad role in the region. But that doesn't mean that we should just give blank checks or give arms. I think it would just be a mistake to let them think that they don't have to have any conduct in trying to conduct this war into diminishing civilian casualties. And the other point I want to raise again is the fact that remember when you were a kid in school and you learned how a bill became a law? Well, something called separation of powers, the checks and balances. It's not right for the president to declare an emergency when there really is no emergency in order to get around Congress's disapproval of something. So I feel it's important to fight for the institution as well. So again, if we do pass this resolution, it'll go to the president's desk and it'll let him answer whether he agrees that our values need to be central to our work around the world. So I thank my colleagues and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 491. The previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed export to the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the Republic of France of certain defense articles and services.
The question is on the passage of the joint resolutions. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The joint resolution is
On
the gentleman from Illinois.
on that,
Yo, every time they give the vote, I gotta laugh because what I'm hearing and what he's saying are two different things. I heard no louder, or a lot of no's louder than I heard I. I'm just listen to how they play these mind games. Hey, Miss Coleman, we doing educational purposes today. Ain't that right, Mary Hart? We doing educational purposes today.
request the yeas and nays.
Gentleman from Illinois has requested the ayes and nays. Those favoring the vote by the ayes and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
A postponement, huh? One guy
What state is it?
say he wanted a head count.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 491, I call up Senate
you gotta
Joint
let me
Resolution
call me.
38 and ask for
Thanks
its
a lot,
immediate
Sugar Love.
consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 38, joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed export to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of certain defense articles and services.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the joint resolution is considered read. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mass, each will control 10 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include in the record extraneous materials on the measure under consideration.
Without objection,
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This final measure we'll consider would stop the transfer of fuses for precision-guided munitions, critical components that allow these weapons to be armed and detonated. Like the bombs, these components have already been manufactured, and we need to act quickly to stop their shipment. As we wrap up this debate, Mr. Speaker, I want to make an appeal to my friends on the other side of the aisle. You can be for or against these weapons sales and still understand that these resolutions are the right thing to do, if nothing else, for the integrity of this body. I spoke earlier about the rule of law. This phony emergency declaration is a message to the Congress and to the American people that when the law gets in the way, this administration is just going to find a way around
Fake
it.
news.
They'll twist the law into pretzels or just throw it out the window entirely if it allows them to sidestep Congress. We cannot stand for that. This administration should have played by the rules, and we could have done that and probably still gotten these sales through. They could have sent up a notification and allowed Congress to have a debate, but instead they want to shut us out of this process. With these resolutions, we're taking some of that power back. We're saying that we won't allow the laws written in this body to be ignored. If nothing else, this is an opportunity to stand up and say, we took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that means Congress remains a co-equal branch.
All right, I'm trying to give you guys a quick sum up of what we're talking about. They want them to purchase the weapons from the United States. 60,000 weapons. And they want them to purchase them from the United States instead of purchasing them from Russia. Now, the weapons that they're going to use is on one of America's allies. I can't make this up. I cannot make it up. They want them to purchase the weapons from the United States to use on their own people, their own allies. So they don't want Russia to make the money because they have the enemy, but they want United States to make the money against their friend, the allies. I'm like, wow.
Of government. Let me say that again. That means that Congress remains a co-equal branch of government. We will not be a rubber stamp for any administration, not only this administration, but any administration. Congress has its duties. We will not be a rubber stamp. I felt for a long time that administrations of both parties, frankly, have ignored Congress when it comes to foreign policy and national security. We shouldn't stand for it any longer. No more do we give a blank check to any president from any party who wants to cut Congress out of the decision-making and subvert the Constitution. So we shouldn't agree to it, we shouldn't stand for it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Okay, so what the Congress is saying, pause, I gotta put it my own way. Pause, we will not allow you any more blank checks. No more blank checks for you, Mr. You-know-who. Mr. You-know-who. And you're not going to use them blank checks to make weapons to give to our allies. This is the fight. This is what they're fighting about right now. The blank check to make weapons, to give to our allies, to give to our enemies, to destroy our allies.
Gentleman from New York reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Masters, recognized.
Yes, RC.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, I request I rise to claim time in opposition.
Gentleman has been recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to SJ Res 38, and I want to focus my remarks on the rationale behind the President's emergency declaration and ask that we think about the definition of the word declaration, what that means to each of us. My friends on the other side of the aisle, they would prefer to forget that these arms sales were expedited for a very specific reason. They are omitting this information because it doesn't fit into their narrative that the president is doing a favor to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And I can tell you that defense is no favor. The threat that emanates from Iran that precipitated this emergency declaration, it is very, very real. And as a result, so is the need for the weapons sales to our partners. So let's think about, are these situations emergencies? Do they pose an immediate risk to life, an immediate threat to life? In May, in the days leading right up to this emergency declaration, Iran and its proxies executed several attacks throughout the Middle East over just 2 weeks. 4 oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman. I would say that's an emergency and a threat to life. Armed drones struck Saudi oil fields. I would say that's an emergency and a threat to life. The head of the Quds Force called on terror groups to prepare for a proxy war. I would certainly call that an emergency and a very direct threat to life. A rocket was launched near the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I would call that an emergency and a threat to life. A bomb-carrying drone was launched by Houthi rebels targeting a Saudi airport on May 21. I would say that is an emergency and a threat to life. Now, in the weeks since the emergency declaration, Iran has only ramped up its attacks, and it's precipitating the need to have this emergency declaration. Houthi rebels have continued attacks on civilian airports in Saudi Arabia. That is an emergency and a direct threat to life. The IRGC perpetrated another attack on commercial shipping, this time targeting Japanese and Norwegian oil tankers transiting through the Straits of Hormuz. I would say that that is an emergency and a threat to life. A rocket hit an oil drilling site in Iraq's southern Basra province, striking inside a compound that housed contractor employees of ExxonMobil. I'd say that's an emergency and a threat to life. Iran shot down a U.S. military asset over international waters. I'd say...
Okay now. Iran shot down military over national waters. National waters mean no one controls these waters. They're all part of a treaty. Listen to what he says. Listen.
That's an emergency, and just last week, 3 Iranian paramilitary vessels tried to impede the passage of a British oil tanker transiting the Straits of Hormuz. And I would say that is an emergency and a threat to life. Now, even as Iran continues to threaten international shipping and civilians in the Middle East, there are members of this body who want to create doubts about the commitments that we have to our partners on the front lines. Now, for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, this is not an abstract threat. It is their tankers that are being attacked, their airports that are being targeted, their oil fields. Now, our bilateral relationship with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, undoubtedly, it is complicated, and we absolutely have to press for improvements in domestic human rights for both countries. I think we can agree on this wholeheartedly. We have to see justice and accountability in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, undoubtedly. And in fact, earlier this week, this body voted overwhelmingly for Mr. Malinowski's H.R. 2037, which imposes sanctions on those responsible for Mr. Khashoggi's murder. And even as the United Arab Emirates draws down in its position in Yemen, we must press Saudi Arabia to minimize civilian casualties in that conflict. But none of these challenges justify whatsoever abandoning our partners as they face down a threat from an Iranian regime that is on
Yep.
about these sales. We have codified congressional review process precisely to address such concerns. However, it is my assessment that my Democratic colleagues abused this review process. Prior to the emergency notification, Republican members had supported these sales, but Democrat members subjected them to informal holds, in some cases for over a year, without any clear path to resolution. Now, given the wide range of conflicts and threats in the Middle East, I do not understand why my colleagues were surprised when, after months and even over a year of delay, it was assessed that our partners urgently needed these defense articles and services for their national security in these emergency situations. Perhaps if my colleagues had taken a more active approach to resolving their concerns, we would have avoided this situation in which additional capabilities were needed to respond to the elevated threat, this emergency situation that has been posted by Iran. Now, Mr. Speaker, there has long been a consensus in this body that Iran's malign activities in the Middle East are a threat to the United States national security and to our partners. In the past 3 years alone, we have passed legislation responding to Iran's support for terrorism, growing ballistic missile arsenal, and human rights abuses. The Iranian regime has not backed down from these malign activities, and it is my sincere hope that this body will not back down from its resolve to counter Iran's destabilizing agenda. Unfortunately, this resolution and the other joint resolutions of disapproval for the 22 sales are very much a step in the wrong direction. And in that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Yes, I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Florida
Nobody
is
want to
recognized.
talk about that.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Taylor.
Oh,
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From its inception, the Islamic Republic of Iran had an anti-American bent. What it did in our embassy, its attack on the Marines in Beirut in 1983, its efforts in Iraq. In 2003, I was part of the invasion force. I saw with my own eyes the Iranian efforts to destabilize Iraq, and they continue to do that there today. They continue to support the Assad regime in Syria. They continue to overthrow the regime in Yemen, supporting the Houthi rebels, attacking Saudi Arabia. Around the Middle East, Iran has become the enemy of freedom and democracy.
Hey,
if America is
Stephen
going to
Bear.
succeed, we need to have allies. We need to have friends. We need to support those allies and those friends, making sure that Saudi Arabia, UAE have the weapons that they need to fight back against Iran's terrorism and warmongering around this region is mission critical for the survival of our republic.
Warmongering.
I stand against this resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from New York.
I reserve for the purpose of closing.
Gentleman reserves from New York. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remainder of my time to close debate on this measure.
Yo,
I'm
you
glad
saw
we've
that
had a
look?
spirited debate on the issues. As always, I'm grateful to my friend, the ranking member, Mr. McCall of Texas,
That's a New
for his
Yorker look.
collegiality. We're generally bipartisan on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and when we do disagree, we do so on the issues and not on the politics and the personalities. I have enormous respect for Mr. Mass, which he knows about, but I would say that this today is not a referendum on Iran. I agree with everything that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have said about Iran. It's bad intentions, it's bad
Correct,
behavior.
RC. Correct.
I agree.
We talking
But
about
again,
them buying the
I say,
weapons
as I
from
said
us.
before, it doesn't mean
not from
we give
Russia,
another country,
but the weapons
be
are
it
going to be
ally or
used
not,
against our
a blank
allies.
check
That
to
is
do
the
whatever
problem.
it pleases. And in this particular case, the conduct of the war in Yemen is just something that we cannot just turn our heads away and say, oh well, this is the war and the Iranians are bad, so therefore we're going to look the other way. I think if we're talking about American weapons, we can demand better. So I think that these measures are a chance for the Congress to take back some of the power granted by the Constitution.
They don't
To
want
say
the
that we
president
won't
to have
stand by
any more
when any
blank checks
administration,
because he
this
overdoing it.
administrations to come in both parties, we won't stand by when any administration ignores Congress, plays fast and loose with the law, and fails to demand accountability for human rights abuses around the world. I encourage all my colleagues to support this measure and the two others that we've just considered. I thank Mr. Mast and my friends on the other side of the aisle, and for a spirited debate. I thank the Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 491. The previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. The question is on the third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
And providing for congressional disapproval of the proposed export to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland of certain defense articles and services.
The question is on the passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The joint resolution is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider from Florida.
And I request the yeas and nays.
The gentleman from Florida has requested the yeas and nays. Those.
Okay. This is the second time they did this, right? When they request the yeas and nays, aka the yes and the no, aka the aye and the nay, when they requesting that, they want those congressmen, those senators, to stand up so they can see who opposed them. Yo, it's like, wow. You want to see who your enemy really is on the other side of the aisle. All right, back to it.
Favorable vote by the yes and nays will rise. A sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
After everybody stand up and show their face. Bring in the wheelchair. Come on. All right. Here's a little bit more.
And reform.
Pursuant.
Does not say that. Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the report is considered read. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, I call up HRES 497 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 497, resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find William P. Barr, Attorney General of the United States, and Wilbur L. Ross, Jr., Secretary of Commerce, in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with subpoenas duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Reform.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the resolution is considered read and shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Reform. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, and the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend remarks and to insert extraneous material.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Chairman, I yield myself 5 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I support this bipartisan resolution to hold Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress because it is necessary to preserve the integrity of this body and of the census. The Constitution mandates that we conduct a census every 10 years and that the census count every person.
Listen.
A full, fair, and accurate account is critical to ensuring that we properly allocate federal funding and congressional apportionment. I do not take this decision lightly. Holding any secretary in criminal contempt of Congress is a serious and sober matter, one that I have done everything in my power to avoid. But in the case of the Attorney General and the Secretary Ross, they have blatantly obstructed our ability to do congressional oversight into the real reason Secretary Ross was trying for the first time in 70 years, to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. Secretary Ross testified under oath that he added a citizenship question and I quote, solely. I want to concentrate on that word, solely, to help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act. But we now know that claim was nothing but a pretext. And do not take my word for that, Madam Speaker. The Supreme Court said that. Our committee's investigation uncovered evidence that Secretary Ross launched a secret campaign to add the citizenship question within days of assuming his post. We learned that Secretary Ross ignored warnings from experts inside and outside the Census Bureau, including the Bureau's chief scientists, that adding a citizenship question would be costly and harm the accuracy of the census. In other words, they were saying, if you do this, you're not going to have an accurate census. Our investigation also revealed that Secretary Ross spoke with Attorney General Sessions, Steve Bannon, and Chris Kobach. Contrary to his testimony to the Congress, the Commerce Department conjured up the voting rights rationale to hide these interactions. This entire Congress should be insulted by this. Committee Democrats first asked for documents from the Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice when we were in the minority in April and May of 2018. Both departments ignored us. When I became chairman, I renewed these requests on behalf of the committee. Since then, the administration has engaged in a purposeful efforts to obstruct, and I do not use that word lightly, our investigation. The departments have refused to provide key unredacted documents that we need to understand the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I've talked
about why
like that from New
they
York.
really made this decision. Instead, what did they do?
Tell us.
They produced thousands of pages that were largely non-responsive, heavily redacted, or publicly already available. When they let us interview witnesses, what did they do? They ordered the witnesses not to answer more than 500 of our questions. Secretary Ross even refused my request to meet to try and work this out. Like I said, I did not come to this floor lightly. This is not an easy decision. But there comes a time when the Congress must speak up for the Congress. I grant myself such times as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
As a result, on April 2nd, more than 3 months ago, after a bipartisan vote, the committee subpoenaed these key documents, including a secret memo that the Department of Commerce wrote about the citizenship question and gave to the Department of Justice. The departments have admitted to us that this memo does exist, but they refuse to produce this document and many others. Now, I must say, in all credit, give credit where credit is due. My good friend and colleague on the other side, Mr. Meadows, worked tirelessly to try to help us get the things that we needed. And I appreciate that. Trying to work in a bipartisan way. But going on from there, last month, in light of this obstruction, the Oversight Committee passed a resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt of Congress. The vote was also bipartisan. However, many of our Republican colleagues...
Okay, we'll pause it right here. Ms. Coleman posts a comment. Her question is, in y'all opinion, who was the better president in your lifetime. For all the people that's in the chat, I can't see how many, I know it's more over 10. All the people that's in the chat, put your favorite president in the chat. Type in your favorite president. We're going to do the first 5. Time ain't expired, TX. Stop it. Mary Hart, you're so true, so true. Okay, RC said, I remember Carter being a pretty good man. Okay, we got you, RC. Who up? Who next? Come on, Miss Coleman. Drop your question. Drop your answer. Drop your answer. Come on now. Drop your answer. Yes, I seen that, Sleeping Bear. I'm gonna do something about that. A video about all the land. You know, keeping prayers out to those in Louisiana. Carter peanut butter farmer better than Nixon. Come on now, we talk about in your lifetime. In your lifetime. Come on now. I have some age on me. I can call quite a few presidents. Okay, Ms. Goldman said none. She said none. She said none. You know, I personally could break down what each president has done to destroy our country. So I'm not going to say one human is better than the next human, but I'm going to say they're devils, whether it be green, purple, orange, yellow, black, or white. They're not serving for our country. They're not serving God. We're not even going to talk about God, so we're going to keep it moving. We can keep it moving. I'm 50, almost 50 plus. I'm 50 plus. I'm 5.0 plus, okay? 5.1 plus coming soon near you. But this is what it is.
We support the President's administration's refusal to comply with duly authorized congressional subpoenas. And let me say to my colleagues that what we are about, we need to be clear that we as a body have a constitutional duty to be a check on the executive branch. That's our job. Every 2 years, we swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. That is what we're supposed to do. And so my colleagues claim that we were interfering with the Supreme Court's decision on this issue. That argument never did make any sense to me. Since we launched our investigation in 2018, more than 10 months before the Supreme Court took up the case. But even if you accept that misguided argument, the Supreme Court case is now over. That argument is gone. The president announced last week that he would no longer pursue adding a citizenship question to the census.
Mind you, they want to keep freezing on him.
Admitted
he comes
that
raw.
he wanted citizenship data to implement partisan gerrymandering. The president's statements directly contradict Secretary Ross's sworn testimony that the only
so, and all that to say, they just don't really even have much concern. They don't really have much concern about our country.
The sole reason the Trump administration wanted this data was to help the Justice Department enforce the Voting Rights Act. The Departments of Justice and Commerce have been engaged in a campaign to subvert our laws and the process Congress put in place to maintain the integrity of the census. And I would say to all of our members, let's be very careful on what we do with regard to the census. It has a tremendous impact for 10 years on how federal funds, more than $660 billion, is appropriated over and over again.
Billions.
Apportionment, redistricting, and making sure that every American gets their fair share back of their taxpayers' dollars.
He's going to tell you about the hard taxpayers' dollars that we as citizens of the United States spend. They spend our money over there. Ladies and gentlemen, not here, because if they were spending our tax dollars here in the United States, we would not have homeless, we would not have hunger, we would not have, people not having jobs, people not living their life, their best life. They're taking our money and spending it over there. And they're spending it for weapons. They spend it for all kinds of craziness that has nothing to do with the United States. So now they want to take a consensus and get all the people and probably raise taxes. They're going to raise taxes again. We already know this. And RC, I am with you 1,001%. I believe that as well, because why is the Federal Reserve controlled by another country? I'm sorry, not another country, another continent. Go figure.
The hard-working money, people who raise the money for our taxes. The resolution before us today is about protecting our democracy. It is about protecting the integrity of this body. It's bigger than the census. It's about protecting the integrity of the Congress of the United States of America. We need to understand how and why the Trump administration tried to add a question based on pretext so that we can consider reforms to ensure that this never happen again. There are those who will ask the question, why would the Supreme Court, having decided what they've decided, and why do you want the documents? We want the documents because we want to make sure that we do not in the future spend
Pause. We want the real documents because we as taxpayer citizens want to know where the bleep, our money is going. We want to know where our money is going. How many of these rich billionaire people get tax breaks? You're getting tax breaks and I'm still paying $7,000, $8,000 a freaking year? Are you serious? Are you serious? And you're getting tax breaks on hundreds of millions of dollars? Right.
A year and a half chasing something that is not accurate. In the words of the Supreme Court, a pretext, delaying our process of getting an accurate account, which is exactly what the Constitution says we must do. And so I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support our resolution to hold.
Here we go with the yay
Attorney
today,
General
y'all.
Barr and Secretary Ross
Listen.
in contempt of the Congress of the United States of America. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition and yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, we are here today debating a premature and ill-advised resolution to hold Attorney General William Barr and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress. In the eyes of the Democrat majority, their crime is not cooperating enough with the Democrats' investigation into the reinstatement of the citizenship question on the 2020 census. First, this contempt citation is a misuse of one of the most powerful tools available to this body. Second, The idea that the Trump administration is stonewalling this investigation, or even in Chairman Cummings' words, engaged in a cover-up from the top, is simply wrong. The bottom line is the Department of Justice and the Department of Commerce are cooperating with the committee's investigation into the reinstitution of the citizenship question on the 2020 census. The administration has produced a total of 31,000 pages of documents to the committee, 14,000 pages from the Commerce Department, and 17,000 pages from the Justice Department. The committee had heard testimony from 6 witnesses, with more interviews expected this month. Secretary Ross himself testified for over 6 hours about his decision to reinstate the citizenship question on the census. What the real issue we should be debating is why the Democrats are afraid to ask how many citizens are in the United States of America. Let's remember, just 1 month ago, the Supreme Court ruled that asking a citizenship question on the census is constitutional. Since the Supreme Court ruling, the President has said a citizenship question will not appear on the 2020 census. To put away all doubt about asking a citizenship question on the census and all future censuses, I introduced a bill last night to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. My bill is intended to put away all doubt about asking a citizenship question on this and future censuses. If the Democrats can't impeach President Trump, they will instead hold his cabinet in contempt of Congress. This is just another episode in political theater. This exercise is not a responsible use of the contempt authority. This is just another attempt for the Democrats to delegitimize the efforts to accurately count the number of United States citizens in the United States. Something that should not be controversial. This is all part of the same game plan to manufacture controversy around anything associated with the Trump administration. These are the sort of abusive tactics that we should reject. These are the sort of tactics that give Congress a bad reputation. We should be better than this. I urge all members of the House to vote against moving this partisan contempt legislation. And I reserve.
Before I...
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from
Give
Maryland.
myself as much time as I'm making.
Gentleman's recognized.
Let me be very clear. This is not theater. I wish it was theater. It's not theater. This is about us making sure that we protect the integrity of the census and of this Congress. And with that, I want to yield now, Madam Speaker, to the distinguished lady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence. 2 minutes.
Gentlelady's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of this resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Commerce Secretary Ross in contempt of Congress. Madam Speaker, we have reached a point that we as Congress must have the courage and we have the duty of our constituents of these United States of America to hold up the Constitution. Congress has an obligation to conduct oversight of the executive branch. Yet this administration complains each time we request information critical to fulfilling our investigative responsibilities. Today, the full House will vote to hold Attorney Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt, criminal contempt of Congress for their complete disregard of the Constitution.
Oh, and there it is. And there it is. They are going to hold them in contempt and give them criminal charges from not listening and obeying the Constitution. All right, you guys. I'm not even going to get into the Constitution. I'm not going to get into the amendments. We're going to get into that on another day. For educational purposes, of course.
Not Democrats, the Constitution. and the refusal to provide our committee with relevant documents relative to the investigation of our 2020 census is 100% within our congressional responsibility to ensure the federal government is ultimately working in the best interest of people. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, to stand up and fulfill their duty and responsibility to the Constitution, which says we must take care of the people of this great country, and that Congress will remain its power as a separate but equal branch of government. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for your leadership, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. Madam Chair, every member of Congress was elected to work on issues that will positively impact their districts. And as we stand here today, our nation is dealing with a crisis at our southern border. Our seniors are struggling with rising prescription drug prices. Our farmers are waiting for a free and fair trade deal with Mexico and Canada. And our veterans deserve care they have earned. Yet today, House Democrats are once again putting off these important issues and continuing with their partisan investigations of President Trump and his administration. Madam Chair, this administration has produced 31,000 pages of documents related to the census. This administration has made 5 senior officials available for interviews. All this due to a disagreement over a citizenship question on the census. Madam Chair, a citizenship question is not new, nor should it be controversial. Every census conducted by the United States government from 1820 to 1950 asked about citizenship. Other countries ask about citizenship. The United Nations recommends it as a best practice. And the Census Bureau today already asks a segment of the population about citizenship. But let's set these facts aside. Given that President Trump is no longer seeking to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, voting on a resolution to hold 2 cabinet members in contempt of Congress is simply a Democratic tactic to waste this chamber's time and avoid working on the serious issues facing our nation. I urge members to vote against the resolution so that the House can stop this partisan nonsense and focus on meaningful policy.
Wow.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney, a member of our committee, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his great leadership. Madam Speaker, today we vote to defend the interest of the American people, our system of checks and balances, and our very Constitution with this resolution to hold Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in criminal contempt. For well over a year, Trump administration officials have lied through their teeth about the reason for adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. They have repeatedly lied to Congress, the Supreme Court, and to the American people. In an effort to cover up their lies, they blocked every demand from our committee, every demand to comply with reasonable oversight, withholding documents, asserting illegitimate executive privilege, and blatantly ignoring bipartisan subpoenas, all to a degree that would literally break the Constitution if allowed to stand. New evidence revealed in court and that I shared on this floor revealed that the real reason for the question was to disenfranchise non-white voters. The Supreme Court ruled that the administration's explanation was, and I quote, contrived. A functional democracy depends on accountability. Accountability requires real oversight. The passage of this criminal contempt resolution is necessary to preserve the integrity of all congressional oversight on this and so many other issues, now and into the future. This contempt resolution, in fact, allows both Democrats and Republicans to do their job. Never, ever during my time in Congress have I encountered such complete contempt for the law, and that contempt deserves to be punished. I urge my colleagues to vote for this. Our democracy depends on it.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina and one of the great leaders of this body, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky. Madam Chairman, let me give you a quote. Holding someone in contempt of Congress is one of the most serious and formal actions our committee can take. It should not be used as a political tool to generate press as part of an election year witch hunt. Now, who is responsible for that quote? It's not Ranking Member Jim Jordan. It's not Leader McCarthy. It's not Conference Chair Liz Cheney.
Disrespect.
It's Chairman Elijah Cummings. Those are his words.
Disrespect.
What we need to do is understand that we're using this as a political tool. And we're better than that. We're better than that. So I'm going to quote also from another letter. From a letter from Chairman Cummings. At that time, he was not the chairman. Chairman Cummings wrote a letter to Speaker Boehner. He said, a fundamental problem with conducting such a partisan investigation is that its results are not even-handed, but instead they're skewed, incomplete, and inaccurate. Chairman Cummings went on further. He said, these deficiencies are magnified when we rush from a committee vote to a floor vote at breakneck speed with little concern for the facts or the law. What was he referring to? He was referring to a contempt vote on Eric Holder. Now here we are today in the same venue. I'm using the chairman's words, and so I'm going to make an appeal to the chairman with the hopes that my good friend opposite will heed these words. Because in that same letter, he made a direct appeal to the Speaker of the House at that particular time, and he said, I hope that the chairman would accept that the Attorney General is willing to come in and meet personally and enter into direct negotiations and enter in good faith to try to resolve this matter. So I'm hoping that the gentleman opposite will withdraw his contempt resolution, not force a vote on this, enter into a direct negotiation with the Attorney General of this great country, and hopefully resolve this without taking this particular matter. Madam Chairman, I think it is critically important that we understand why we're here today. It is because we're using two standards. One standard for the minority party at one time and one standard for a majority party another. Let's use the same standard and make sure that we give the Attorney General the ability to negotiate directly with the gentleman opposite. And Madam Chair, I certainly hope that cooler heads will prevail and that we actually get to the bottom of this, and it's about allowing Congress to do its job, but do it with respect. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Disrespectful.
Gentleman's recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Let me be clear. First of all, I want to thank the gentleman for quoting me so much. I'm tremendously honored. And I think the quotes that he used just reiterates what I said when I began, how seriously I take this matter. And I wouldn't be here if I did not consider this to be very serious. The other thing I would say is we've made tremendous efforts, and the gentleman knows it because he's trying to work with me to try to get the documents and the things that we need. We have not been able to get them. And with that, I yield to Mr. Gomez 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The census can be used to either marginalize or to empower communities. This president decided on the path of marginalization. And they did that by coming up with an idea to silence the voices of immigrant communities throughout the country by adding a citizenship question that they deemed necessary to enforce the Voting Rights Act. But for 53 years, no Department of Justice had a problem of enforcing the Voting Rights Act without census block data on citizenship. But all of a sudden, 2017 comes around, you know what? We have a problem. And this is the excuse that they had. This is the reason that they had to add this question to the citizenship, to the census. And it is just completely false. You know, even to an extent that you saw that they said that the Department of Justice was the ones that asked for it. Then we find out later that they had to shop around to the Department of Homeland Security and other departments in order to get somebody to try to ask for the Census Bureau to add the question.
To even think about it.
But then they went back to Jeff Sessions, who carried out their request. So we're investigating because everything that they've said, the Department of Commerce and Wilbur Ross, has been a complete lie.
Ooh.
And if you don't believe me, the recent Supreme Court decision said, quote, unlike a typical case in which an agency may have both stated and unstated rationale, the sole stated reason seems to have been contrived. And what does contrived mean? It means forced, artificial, manufactured,
fake,
false, false. And that's what it is. It is a contrived reason. And the American people needed to have a right to know the real reasons, not the contrived reasons, not the ones that were manufactured, not the ones that were made up. And that's why we're asking for these documents. And that's why when Congress cannot perform its obligations as an oversight and check on the executive branch, then we must hold these individuals in contempt. And I ask my colleagues to do the same thing. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
The chair will remind members that we are in the committee of the whole House, and as such, they are to direct their remarks to the Speaker Pro Tem. Gentlelady's recognized.
Thanks, RC.
Madam Speaker, I rise
So
today
true,
to
Sleepy
oppose the
Bear.
resolution before us. Knowing who is in our country should not be controversial. Let me repeat that. Knowing who is in our country should not be controversial. Although my colleague across the aisle have blurted fact and fiction on this issue, the truth is asking a citizenship question is standard operating procedure. It is currently asked on the censuses throughout.
I gotta pause this. My 2 cents is in my head right now. They don't care about the people in the country. They don't care about the rats that come over on the boat in the country. They don't care about the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes flying from other countries onto all kinds of things that come into the country. But it's okay for all the drugs that come into the country. Okay? It's okay for murderers to be expedited back into the country. But they make up their mind.
The world, in Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Mexico, the UK, and many others. The United Nations even recommends asking the citizenship question as a best practice on the census, so countries can gather accurate information about their citizens. It's not a new idea in the U.S. either. We first asked a citizenship question on the census in 1820 and continued the practice for the next 130 years. And it is still asked every year on the American Community Survey. The information collected is protected by federal law, and our Justice Department uses the information to enforce the Voting Rights Act. We still ask the citizenship question on I-9 employment eligibility forms. Right here in the District of Columbia, a citizenship question is asked on driver's license applications. They do the same in Wisconsin. In California, anyone who applies for a firearm license has to answer a citizenship question. And in Ohio, concealed carry applicants must verify if they are citizens or not. These states believe it is fine to ask this question to obtain a firearm or driver's license, but it's not okay to ask on the census. So for anyone to claim that this is a hot button issue, I just don't buy it. It seems a little bit more.
They use our information against us. I promise you. They use it against us. They use our information against us. The driver's license. How you want to tell me? At one time, I'm a donor. How you want to tell me I got to pay you $300-something to get that off my card? Because I decided to leave my organs to my family instead of to a random person. You better make up your living wills, people. We'll talk about that another day too.
Like hot air. I'm glad that President Trump is working across federal agencies to ensure that we can get this crucial information. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution so we can get back to actual work. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking chairman of our Committee on Civil Rights, the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, my colleague, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the chairman, I am charmed and tickled by the argument offered by our friend Mr. Meadows, who quotes our beloved chairman in resisting a rush to a contempt vote against Attorney General Holder. Of course, two sides can play this game because the gentleman from North Carolina, of course, voted for and championed a contempt citation against the Attorney General in that case. So why would he support a contempt finding as appropriate against one Attorney General who's acting in a recalcitrant way, but not against another? Madam Speaker, this is not a policy battle about the citizenship question, although my friends seem to think that it is. They have already lost that battle. They lost it in the federal district courts 3 times. They lost it in the United States Supreme Court. When they lost it with Chief Justice John Roberts. They lost it with the majority of the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court that was gerrymandered by Senator McConnell for precisely occasions like this, so they could get the outcome they wanted. But even that court rejected the contrived rationale that was offered by the Commerce Department. It's been rejected by 6 former census directors. It was rejected by their own chief scientist in the Commerce Department and the Census Bureau. They lost the case under the Census Act. They lost the case under the Administrative Procedures Act. Even President Trump acknowledges that they lost it, at least today. I think he acknowledges it, although he does waver back and forth, and I hope nothing that we say today will prompt him to start over again. They lost because their justification was...
Yeah, but did you guess that? He talking about it. Then he says, I hope he don't use what he's saying to start all over again. You think he's not? You think he's not?
Contrived, according to Chief Justice Roberts. It was made up, completely pretextual, according to the federal district courts, arbitrary, capricious, irrational, silly. We get the citizenship information we need right now, and we have for the last 70 years under what was called the long form, now it's called the American Community Survey. 6 former Census Bureau directors said, if you do what they wanted to do, but it's been rejected, but if you do what they want to do, you're going to get far more inaccurate counting. You're going to get a far less accurate portrait of America. If I might have 30 seconds more, Mr. Chairman.
We'll grant the gentleman a minute.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute.
Thank you very much. So, if you want to talk about the policy, we can, but we don't need to. They've already lost repeatedly on that, and they seem not to want to acknowledge that basic fact of this discussion. This is about congressional power, Madam Speaker, and that's something that should unify every member of this body and institution. We must stand together. The Supreme Court has said repeatedly, the federal courts said repeatedly, that our fact-finding power is inextricable and essential and indispensable to our legislative power.
Woo!
We have the power from the people. The sovereign political power of the people has been given to us to legislate. And we can't legislate if we can't get the information that we need. Sometimes we disagree when they're in the majority with the stuff that they want. I'm sure I wasn't here then, but I would have disagreed maybe with some of the fast and furious stuff or the millions of documents that they got in the Benghazi investigation. It makes no difference.
The millions of documents they got in the Benghazi. Clinton.
The majority has a right to get what it wants. We've got a right to get what we want. If you act with contempt for the Congress of the United States of America and the people of the United States, we will hold you in contempt of the Congress and the United States of America, and I support these contempt resolutions.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, the great Minority Leader McCarthy.
The gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Before I walked out of my office, I first looked at my calendar. I knew it was July, but I wondered if it was back in February. It's another day on the floor. It's like Groundhog Day all over again. Yesterday on this floor was a sad day. It's not a day about decorum. This was not a day about any of the issues that any of my constituents asked about. They asked me when I go home, and Madam Speaker, I envision that they ask most every member in this body, have you done anything about surprise billing? Have you made sure pre-existing conditions is protected like that bill Greg Walden has with so many co-sponsors? Have you done anything making sure the economy continues to grow? No, I go home and I tell them they had another resolution to attack President Trump or the administration. So we may be in July, but it's Groundhog Day all over again. Are we doing anything about a budget? Because, Madam Speaker, I listened. I listened to my colleagues when they say, show me your budget, show me your values. And I know winning in a majority is important. And I knew, Madam Speaker, we in the majority, putting a budget out is not easy. But it is the fundamental responsibility of a majority. So yes, I came to this floor hoping we'd have...
I ain't seen the budget yet get reached. Every time I turn around, everything is over budget.
that debate, but no debate about a budget. Can't tell my constituents that the majority did a budget this year. When they ask me, well, what about, I read all these about a caps, that you got to come into agreement to ever make something happen together. No, I'm coming back down to the floor. This time we're talking about contempt. They asked me, Madam Speaker, well, what contempt are you talking about? I said, well, it's regard the census. Well, wasn't that all solved? Well, yeah, that's already been solved and already been decided. But Madam Speaker, this majority thinks it's another political opportunity. Then I listened and I heard this comment the other day. Madam Speaker, they said, I challenge you to find voters that can name a single thing House Democrats have done for their kitchen table this year. A single thing, challenging all voters to name one thing. And I wondered, did my press operation put that? No, didn't come from my office. Then I wondered, maybe it was another Republican inside this body. No, it wasn't one member elected on the Republican side. This quote actually came from a chief of staff of one of the most prominent members on the other side of the aisle. I agree with that chief of staff. Name me one thing that we have done for the kitchen table. Yesterday, we did a resolution attacking the president, but we couldn't even get to that. Because, Madam Speaker, we couldn't even have decorum in this body. We set a record that we've never seen before based upon a speaker's action. The very first page in Thomas Jefferson's manual talks about decorum. But not only did this body try to change the rules after the fact, they don't think everybody's equal, Madam Speaker. Because if your words get taken down, you don't have a right to speak that day. But no, we should change that. We should show them. The majority should get what they want. Madam Speaker, I guess the majority doesn't want a budget. I guess the majority doesn't want to do anything about surprise billing. I guess the majority doesn't want to find, when it comes to our national defense, to keep a 58-year history of bipartisanship. They broke that record too. They made it partisan, and that's what we did last week. Well, now we're right back at Groundhog Day, and we're going to have contempt votes today. But that's not all we're going to do today. We're going to go for the third time on impeachment.
Third time.
Impeachment.
Third time. Third time.
Madam Speaker.
Third time. Impeachment.
I watched a crisis on a border.
Not one, not two.
I listened to the other side who asked the president if he would pause a court act. Because, Madam Speaker, I'm not in the majority. I can't control these committees. The majority party can. They didn't have one hearing on it. But they've scheduled another one. They got Mueller coming in. They even postponed it so they could have more time. I guess 22 months, $40 million, 13 countries. I guess that's not enough. Madam Speaker, I wonder if it's only one chief of staff challenging to find voters that can name a single thing House Democrats have done for the kitchen table this year. Because when I'm home, they don't come up to me and talk to me about party. They talk to me about what the House is doing. Because in their house and their kitchen table, you know what they talk about there? They talk about their budget. Because they do know their budget is their values. And they value having a budget. They'll talk politics, but I don't think they get too petty. It's interesting. In the kitchen table, the House of Representatives, there's rules for different people. I thought the rule of law mattered in this country. And I was kind of excited when I watched the problem-solving caucus stand up together, Republicans and Democrats, before there was a vote for a speaker in this Congress, and they requested a consensus calendar. And what does a consensus calendar mean? It means if a member from any side of the aisle works really hard, that they believe in the issue, that they get 290 co-sponsors. And you have to understand what that means. That doesn't mean walking up to a congresswoman or congressman and saying, will you support my bill? Will you put your name on this? Do you believe in this policy so great? Will you put your name on this? And it takes 218 to pass a bill, but that's not the number they put out. 290.
290.
To get above politics.
290.
If you made that happen, your bill would come to the floor. Well, that was the rule. That's what we just put in. Madam Speaker, you know what happened? There was this congressman from South Carolina. He didn't get 290. He's up to 370.
Ooh.
He followed the exact rule that the majority just put in. And you know what happened at the day that he was going to be the very first bill on a consensus calendar? And what was the topic that really brought people together? Survivor benefits for those who gave their life to defend this nation.
Facts.
I was proud. I was proud that more than 370 people in this body did not play politics with that issue. But you know what happened when that day came? The rules are not equal.
Nope.
The rules are not equal. They are written, but they are changed. They were changed last Friday. They were changed so he could not have his vote. So Congressman Joe Wilson could not come to this floor. Was it changed in a committee? No. They put it in a rule. Self-executing.
Yep. Y'all better read up on this stuff.
Yesterday, when I watched the quorum on this floor, any other member of this body would not have the right to speak if their words were taken down. It was me, you, anybody else. But no, the rules were changed once again. And everybody on one side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, voted to change those rules. That they hold people seem to be different, seem to be special, seem that they can break the rules. I guess the majority should get what they want, not what the people around the kitchen table of America want. I wonder, Madam Speaker, I wonder, when I watch people campaign and they talk about what they want to achieve here, how many said they wanted to have a week of contempt, of impeach, and resolution all after one entity, the President of the United States? I didn't have anybody on any side of the aisle ever ask me that question. I hold this job with a great deal of respect. You know, there's less than 12,000 people that ever had the privilege to serve here. I travel a long way each week to have that opportunity. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I spend a lot of time listening and talking to my constituents. Last night, I went home and I did a telephone town hall. Thousands of people were on that call. Now, one person asked me about the contempt of a census form that's already going out. They talked about an earthquake. They wondered if they'd have enough money I don't know. We don't have a budget. The hospital. This community is not very big, Ridgecrest, about 30,000. The earthquake did damage to the hospital. People could get some surprise billings. Not anything their fault. But we're not talking about it on this floor. We're not solving that problem. But we're holding another person in the administration in contempt. Is this going to go anywhere? Is this going to do anything for anybody's kitchen table? I know some people on the other side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, might get mad at this chief of staff. But sometimes you get upset when people speak the truth. Sometimes it hurts. What hurts more to the American public is more of this. If it's just going to be Groundhog Day every day that we serve here, because once we get done with this, we'll debate impeachment for the third time. For the third time, we'll debate impeachment. When we go home this week and we talk about what we achieved, I don't know what I can say. That's not why we ran. We are better than this. When I watched the decorum yesterday, I know we are better than that. But what's most disturbing to me is when somebody did not abide by the rules of the House, the rules were changed to protect that person. America is more than a country. America is an idea of self-governance, idea of a rule of law, of a respect. If you care so much to change the rule that you would have a consensus calendar, abide by it. Not just because somebody on the other side of the aisle worked harder. If you cared so much that you said a budget matters, that it sets the tone of who you are, produce one. I understand there's winners and losers in elections. But Madam Speaker, when I heard what a member said of why they wanted to battle, they admitted to their colleagues they were using the census investigation to gather information that, in his words, that the courts could use in ongoing litigation. So are we really here because your constituents asked about it? Are we here because you just want to play a little more politics? Because I would tell you this. You got another thing coming up right after they could play politics on it one more time. I would ask, deep inside, that for once, let's put it aside. I know that election didn't turn out the way you wanted it, but at the end of the day, people expect us to find common ground. They expect us to give on both sides. And I will guarantee you, no one ever went to the polls to say, I want you to go there to spend a whole week just attacking an administration. I imagine the majority of people who voted for you had the same question that chief of staff. They wanted you to change the kitchen table. So let's start focusing on the issues that the American public is talking around their kitchen tables. And I yield back.
Members are directed to direct their comments to the chair. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself, such as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to make it clear, Madam Speaker, as I listen to the comments of our very distinguished minority leader, I forgot. The fact is that what we are doing today is trying again to protect the integrity of this House and protect the integrity of the census and make sure that we get the records that we need to do our job. And I would hope that he would join us in making sure that happens, because it's not just about us. It's about people that will come and fill these seats when we're dancing with the angels. And so with that, I want to yield to the very distinguished gentleman from Virginia, a man who leads our government operations subcommittee excellently, the distinguished member from our committee again, Mr. Connolly. 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank my good friend, the distinguished Chairman of the Oversight and Reform Committee. Madam Speaker, what we just heard might be described as hyperannuated chutzpah. To bemoan accountability, to talk about a kitchen table that's, I think, imaginary. I can tell you it doesn't characterize kitchen tables in my district, and it probably doesn't characterize them all across America, which is maybe why the minority leader is called that instead of the majority leader in this Congress. Because my Republican friends abrogated any accountability, any oversight of this administration in the 2 years they were in the majority and Mr. Trump was in the White House. Americans are focused on economic and health issues, but that doesn't mean they don't care about what's happening to their country. They do. The census, the distinguished minority leader doesn't want you to focus on why the census question was so important, because it's in a context that is disturbing. It's in a context of voter suppression all across America. Get rid of early voting. Restrict absentee voting. Have stricter ID laws. Make it harder for students and people of color to vote. Purge voting rolls. Have manufactured assertions about phony voting, as if that were the major problem in America. Asking the citizenship question on the census is part and parcel of that scheme to discourage minority voting in America, to frighten immigrant communities.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Give the gentleman another 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
And finally, maybe the worst of all, to bemoan the change yesterday to allow the Speaker to have her words considered and to allow her back on the floor. Why? Because we don't care about rules? No. Because we cared about the impact on millions of Americans of harmful, racist words. And we felt that duty to provide some comfort to those people that this House cared was more important than a juridical commitment
Gentleman's time's expired.
to an ancient rule.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining for each side?
Gentleman from Kentucky has 18.5 minutes. Gentleman from Maryland has 7 minutes. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Goffman.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Prior to talking about the census, I just want to make one brief point in response to some of the debate on the other side. We'll give some of the speakers a little bit of a project here. When we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we pledge allegiance to the flag and the republic for which it stands. And perhaps some of the speakers on the other side can do a little research as to why we pledge allegiance to the republic. Today again, we are debating because of a potential question on the census. There's certain people who feel that it would be wrong to ask about citizenship on the census. I can tell you as a lawmaker, I would certainly like to know how many people in this country are citizens. I'd also like to know how many people are legal or illegal, both of which may affect decisions we make, formulas we make here. I have a bill up in the past, I'll reintroduce it this year, that says that people who are non-citizens shouldn't be eligible for public benefits. If that bill were ever to become law, I can easily imagine distributions of money from this place being affected by the results on a census like that. Other countries do not have problems getting numbers if they ask about citizenship. Canada doesn't have a problem. Mexico doesn't have a problem. That's why the United Nations recommends we ask about citizenship. It didn't result in bad censuses until 1950. It doesn't result in bad results on the long form or bad results on the community survey. It doesn't result in problems in the state of Wisconsin where we have a citizenship question that you have to answer prior to getting a driver's license. So I wish we would put away this resolution today. I don't think it is right to spend more time debating the census question. I hope if President Trump if this does not appear on this census, that it is eventually put in the census for 2030. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my good friend for courageously bringing this contempt resolution to the House today. The authority, the very integrity of the House of Representatives have been challenged by the administration as never before in American history. If it were not for the Supreme Court, the administration's determination to deliberately prevent an accurate census count would have succeeded. Neither the President nor the Republican House has the support of a majority of the American people. Using Secretary Ross, the administration tried to cheat its way to an undercount. Both Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross have gone out of their way to refuse to provide needed documents or offered pretexts for not providing them pursuant to valid subpoenas. So serious has been this obstruction that the House must seek criminal contempt, which can carry stiff penalties and prison time, or simply surrender to the administration and invite continuing obstruction of our ability to perform our legislative and oversight functions. To be sure, we fully recognize the difficulty of enforcement of criminal contempt against this administration by this administration. But the House would as soon surrender its authority as to take no action in the face of historic and willful defiance. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my friend from Ohio, the distinguished ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the gentleman from Kentucky for yielding and for his great work on the committee. Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr are doing their jobs. So what's their reward? Democrats are going to hold them in contempt. Both agencies, the Commerce Department, the Justice Department, have submitted 31,000 documents to the committee. They've made available all kinds of witnesses for depositions and transcribed interviews. In fact, we got another one happening later this month. And the Secretary himself sat for over 6 hours in a hearing answering every single question the committee had. Raised his hand, said he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help him God, answered all the questions. And what's he get for it? Democrats are going to hold him in contempt. And why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? All because they don't want a simple question on the census. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? That one sentence is driving it all. Are you a citizen of the greatest nation in history is driving it all. They're going to hold two people doing their jobs in contempt. All because they don't want to do what's been done for 200 years in this country. Since 1820, in one form or another, we have been asking the citizenship question on a census. They're going to hold them in contempt. All because they don't want to do what the UN says is the best practice. They're going to hold them in contempt. all because they don't want to do what's just plain old common sense. Listen to what Justice Alito said in his opinion a couple weeks ago. No one disputes that it's important to know how many inhabitants of this country are citizens, and the most direct way to gather this information is to ask it in a census. Shazam. Imagine that. Best way to figure it out is to ask the people in the country that you're surveying. Holy cow. And here's the kicker. Here's the final thing. You go anywhere in this country, any state you want to go to, walk up on some small town, some big city, walk up on the street, ask someone on the street, do you think when we do the census to figure out how many people are in this country, it's appropriate to ask if you're a citizen? And every person you talk to, every single one of them, will say, well, heck yeah. And oh, by the way, aren't we doing that already? And you would have to say, yes, we've been doing it for 200 years. This resolution is ridiculous, and we should vote it down. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself so much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I just want to, Madam Speaker, I want to just remind our distinguished ranking member, when he talks about quoting from the courts, we might want to look at what the Supreme Court said about the language that Mr. Ross, Secretary Ross, used in our committee, and because the same language was used in the Supreme Court case. And what the Supreme Court said was that was contrived, and that's a quote, and incongruent with what the record reveals. In other words, he was saying it was not accurate. He may have come and testified before us, but it wasn't accurate. With that, I want to yield to the distinguished lady, a member of our committee, Ms. Plaskett, for acknowledgement.
How long is, I'm sorry?
Oh, 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to respond first to the distinguished gentleman from California, the minority leader, Mr. McCarthy, when he talked about us doing work. He asked us if work was being done here in Congress and that we weren't responding to the daily needs of America. I would remind him and remind the Speaker that we in fact have passed the Violence Against Women Act in the Judiciary Committee. The Energy and Commerce Committee passed the prescription drug bill that came to this floor. Energy and Commerce is working on Medicaid as we speak right now. 150 bills have been passed by this body and are sitting on the desk of his friend, the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, who has decided that he is not interested in the work of the people of the United States. But guess what? We can walk and chew gum at the same time, as I've said, and this committee's responsibility is oversight, not anything else. And that's what we are doing, is oversight of this administration. I know that's difficult for that side of the aisle to want to think about, is overseeing and not reining in individuals who may be acting outside of the law. Last year, when the Secretary Ross testified before Congress, he said that he added the citizenship question solely to help the Department of Justice enforce the Violence Rights Act. We understand now that that may not have been true. And he has given us unresponsive, that's a legal term, unresponsive documents in those thousands of documents that he has turned over to us, not the documents that we have asked. And it's our responsibility as the Oversight Committee to hold individuals responsible. I would ask that my colleagues across the aisle would consider their responsibility on this committee, if you want to sit on the committee, to do the work of the committee, and that is overseeing this administration. I think that we have done our job and we are doing it well. If he has not been responsive, we must hold him in contempt. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. The problem is that this is not the way we're supposed to go about the business of oversight. Contempt resolutions are generally something that happens deep inside and deep within an ongoing investigation when the committee is run up against brick walls and have exhausted all possibilities before them. That is certainly not the case here.
We are in the middle of an investigation into federal agencies that are complying with our requests. This is absurd. The Oversight Committee has held 6 transcribed interviews with the witnesses. Another one is on the way within days. Commerce Department and Justice Department have produced over 31,000 pages, documents, combined 14,000 from Commerce, 17,000 from Justice. These are not things that happen when we're talking about federal agencies that are stonewalling an investigation. That simply is not what's happening here. This investigation has only been going on for a couple of short months, and I would like to remind this chamber that it wasn't too long ago that then Ranking Member Cummings cautioned himself against pursuing a resolution of contempt in 2012, and that was after a year of stonewalling by the Obama administration. We're just a couple of months into this one. Look, if these federal agencies were legitimately stonewalling investigation as the Obama administration did, I would certainly feel differently, and I'm sure others here would as well, but they are not stonewalling, and the facts simply don't support this contempt resolution. I urge my colleagues not to support this, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
I don't think he can do that. Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to make a point that in this body now, on 2 consecutive days, we've broken the rules of Congress to expedite things. In this particular contempt resolution, I want to make sure that the record reflects that we broke Rule 2F on the committee about notice. It was brought to the attention of the chairman, and here we are again, going and violating the rules of this House, not rules that the minority put in place, but rules that the majority put in place. And we gave the chairman the chance to perfect this procedural problem, and yet they continued on to hold this contempt violation. So I can tell you, they may vote today to hold them in contempt, but it is a violation of Congress's very rules itself that should have been remedied. And with that, I ask that the gentleman opposite withdraws his resolution so that we can perfect this. And I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Maryland.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Upon assumption of the chairmanship of the committee on January 19th, the chairman of the Oversight Committee formally initiated an inquiry into Secretary Ross's decision to reinstitute the citizens' question on the 2020 census. Just recently, as of June 27, 2019, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling. And the Supreme Court ruled that the administration may ask a citizenship question, but rejected the rationale presented by the Secretary Ross for adding the question on the 2020 census. The committee's fact-finding is still active and ongoing. The administration is cooperating with the investigation. The DOC and the DOJ have produced 31,000 responsive documents, 14,000 from the DOC and 17,000 from the DOJ. The committee has held 6 transcribed interviews with witnesses, and a 7th interview is expected. In short, Madam Chair, the Judiciary Committee has already held Bill Barr in contempt for not violating federal law. And now the Oversight Committee is about to hold Bill Barr in contempt for cooperating with the committee. This is wrong. This is not how we're supposed to do business in this chamber. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Continue to.
Gentleman from Maryland continues to reserve. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Thank you. This is such a disturbing time for those of us that have spent our lives, our adult lives, trying to see that justice is done, laws are followed, and yet here we again come after Attorney General Bob Barr and another cabinet official, Ross. But truth is, I didn't really know Bob Barr when he got appointed, when he nominated, but I knew that he was friends with Bob Mueller. That caused me concern. But it appears we have an attorney general who is concerned about justice, and he's concerned about stopping injustices. And yet we still have people that are wanting to cause as much trouble for the president, stop his administration from getting as much accomplished for the American people as possible. And it's got to stop at some point. And so it's like a game. We come here and we're going to hold him in contempt again. This is a double secret probation against Bob Barr. How many double, triple, quadruple secret probations are we going to do? This isn't going to amount to anything. You take this to any federal judge to try to enforce it, he will look, she will look at the procedure and go, this is ridiculous. You're not going to have me hold the Attorney General in contempt for trying to follow the law, and you're wanting to interrupt his efforts to follow the law. That's not happening. So this is all about a show when there is true injustice going on. And thank God that we have a president that wanted to see justice done. He knew he didn't collude. And now we have an attorney general that's trying to do the same thing. Let's say no to this contempt. Let's get back to doing the job the American people want us to do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman continues to reserve.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make Mr. Cummings aware that I have no further speakers and I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
Gentlemen, we reserve, and the gentleman may close it. And we have no
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized to close.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think that just about everyone who spoke on our side of the aisle made the factual points that this is not necessary. This resolution is an ongoing attempt by the majority party to try to do anything they can to disrupt the presidency of our President of the United States. Every country, just about in the world, asked the citizenship question. Mexico and Canada asked the citizenship question. In fact, the United Nations recommends that countries ask the citizenship question. I don't, for the life of me, know why we would resort to this type of action in this body, especially after what happened yesterday. I wonder, Madam Speaker, is this an attempt to try to move the direction of the American people from their frustration at the lack of achievement by the majority party from a legislative standpoint to try to somehow enrage their anger at the president? This is unnecessary. This is more political theater, and I urge the members of this fine body to oppose this resolution.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time is left?
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Very well. Madam Speaker, some of my Republican, I yield myself to 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Some of my colleagues have argued that holding Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress is premature. That's simply not true. If anything, it is long overdue. The Department of Commerce and the Department of Justice have failed to comply with congressional requests for more than a year. The Oversight Committee Democrats first asked for documents from the Commerce Department in April of 2018 and from the Department of Justice May of 2018. Those requests were ignored. When I became chairman, I renewed those requests. In response, the administration produced thousands of pages, but most of the documents were either heavily redacted, already public, or non-responsive to the committee's requests. So the committee narrowed its requests and issued bipartisan subpoenas to compel production of that narrow group of documents. That was in April, more than 3 months ago. I even asked Secretary Ross to meet with me personally. He refused. And last month, the committee passed the bipartisan resolution before us to hold Secretary Ross and Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress. Still, neither department has provided the documents that we've asked for. And so I've come to the floor to urge our members to vote in favor of this. I do not, again, bring this lightly. This is not theater. This is about doing our job. This is about protecting the integrity of not only our census, but of our Congress. And with that, Madam Speaker, I urge all members to vote for this resolution, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered on the resolution. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, the resolution.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman request the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to the bill H.R. 1847 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1847, a bill to require congressional notification for certain changes in status of inspectors general and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Ruda, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous materials on the measure before us.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I am proud to support the Inspector General Protection Act, which would improve the independence of inspectors general. This bipartisan bill, introduced by Representatives Ted Lieu and Jody Hice, would also address the disturbingly slow nomination of IGs that have been the norm across multiple administrations. The bill would require notification of Congress 30 days prior to an IG being placed on leave. Such notification is already required prior to an IG being removed from duty. The bill would also require the President to report to Congress if he has not nominated an IG after 210 days of a vacancy occurring. The report must include the reasons for failing to make the nomination and a target date for doing so. The requirement will hopefully prod the executive branch to nominate IGs in a more timely manner. IGs provide critical oversight and accountability within federal agencies, and the positions needed to be filled more quickly than is currently the case. I urge members to support this bipartisan bill and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield myself as such time as I may consume. I rise in support of H.R. 1847, the Inspector General Act. I want to thank Representative Ted Lieu for working in a bipartisan manner on this legislation. H.R. 1847 will help ensure that Inspectors General vacancies across federal agencies will be filled in a timely manner. Inspectors General play an important role in improving the operations of the federal government. They help combat fraud, waste, and abuse throughout executive branch departments and agencies and promote a resourceful and effective federal government. They have assisted us with discharging one of our most important responsibilities, shining the light on areas of the government that need improved efficiency and economy. However, throughout both Republican and Democrat administrations, there have been numerous vacant Inspector General positions. Certain agencies have experienced prolonged periods of absent Inspector General leadership. For example, the Department of Interior has been without a permanent Inspector General since 2009. Likewise, there are approximately 13 vacant Inspector General positions for agencies covered by the Inspector General Act. This bill would require the President to timely notify Congress of a failure to nominate an Inspector General for a given agency. The President would also be required to explain why a nomination has not yet been made and provide a target date for that nomination. The bill also calls for increased transparency by requiring the President to notify Congress if an Inspector General is placed on leave or changes status. Inspectors General are an indispensable tool to Congress. By ensuring the federal government is adequately staffed with Inspectors General, we are reaffirming our commitment to rooting out government fraud, waste, and abuse. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield as many minutes as he'd like to consume to the distinguished gentleman, the sponsor of this legislation, Representative Ted Lieu.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, let me thank the gentleman from California and the gentleman from Pennsylvania for your comments in support of this legislation. I rise today in support of my bipartisan bill, H.R. 1847, the Inspector General Protection Act, which will enhance their independence and integrity of our IGs. Since Congress passed the original Inspector General Act of 1978, these government watchdogs have played a crucial role in our democracy. They root out waste, fraud, mismanagement, and abuse at all levels of government, saving the American taxpayer billions of dollars annually and ensuring that government programs benefit the people. According to Nonpartisan Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, the taxpayers saved $32.7 billion in fiscal year 2017 from audit recommendations. That's a $22 return on every dollar invested. Unfortunately, both Democratic and Republican administrations have hamstrung our IGs with persistent vacancies and underfunded budgets. According to the Project on Government Oversight, vacancies of permanent inspectors general is not a new problem, one that is unique to this administration. This issue has persisted for years under both Democratic and Republican leadership. The Department of the Interior, for example, has lacked a Senate-confirmed inspector general for over a decade. But it's not just vacancies that have been problematic. In a committee report, the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs noted that another type of personnel action has the potential for doing significant damage to OIG independence if abused, placing an IG on indefinite paid or unpaid non-duty status. My bill will address both of these problems. First, H.R. 1847 requires notification to Congress in advance of an Inspector General being placed on administrative leave. This ensures Congress is aware of any potential attempts to improperly sideline an Attorney General. And second, the bill requires the President to report to Congress if an Inspector General has not been nominated within 210 days of a vacancy that occurs for their position, including the reasons a nomination has not been made and a target date for doing so. This reasserts Congress's oversight role and allows members to question on an informed basis the decision of any future administration to leave these offices vacant. As Senator Chuck Grassley told the Washington Post in 2017, independent, nonpartisan IGs can be some of the President's best allies in finding and cutting waste, fraud, and abuse in a bureaucracy. I agree with that statement. That is why I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, as well as the U.S. Senate, and getting this common sense bill signed into law. I'm grateful to my colleague Jody Heiss of Georgia for partnering with me on this legislation, and to Chairman Cummings and Ranking Member Jordan for recognizing the importance of strengthening our nation's inspectors general. I'm also proud that this bill has received the endorsement of good governance groups across their ideological spectrum, including the Project on Government Oversight, R Street Institute, American Oversight, Campaign for Accountability, Common Cause, and Public Citizen. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting good governance by voting yes, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Ruda, reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would like to make the gentleman from California aware that I have no further speakers and am prepared to close.
Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1847 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to the bill H.R. 736 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 736, a bill to require the Director of the Government Publishing Office to establish and maintain an online portal accessible to the public that allows the public to obtain electronic copies of all congressionally mandated reports in one place and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Ruda, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the measure before us.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I want to thank Representative Mike Quigley for his persistence in pursuing this good government legislation. Hopefully, we can get this bill enacted this Congress. H.R. 736, the Access to Congressionally Mandated Reports Act, is a non-controversial bill that has been approved by the Oversight Committee many times. The bill is a common sense measure that would make the government more transparent and accountable. It would create a one-stop shop where Congress and members of the public could access agency reports to Congress. Federal agencies submit thousands of reports to Congress each year. This bill will improve congressional oversight by making it easy to find and access these reports. H.R. 736 would also give the public access to agency reports. Currently, members of the public often have to file requests under the Freedom of Information Act to obtain some agency reports to Congress. Many of these reports are not available online. An online library of federal reports would improve the ability of our staffs to use the information in them to make sound policy. It also would encourage agency compliance with reporting requirements. Finally, it would support timely access to the reports by state and local governments, students, academics, and others with the additional benefit of decreasing the burden on agencies to process FOIA requests. The Access to Congressionally Mandated Report Act has been endorsed by over 25 organizations from across the political spectrum. I have a letter from those groups that I will enter into the congressional record. Legislation similar to this bill has been introduced in the Senate and favorably reported by the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. I urge all my colleagues to support this legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise today in support of H.R. 736, the Access to Congressionally Mandated Reports Act, sponsored by my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Quigley. Federal agencies are required to produce numerous reports to Congress each year. The reports cover a wide range of topics that give valuable insight to government activities. While some reports are posted on agency websites, most are not available online. It is incredibly difficult for the general public to find reports, especially older reports. Keep in mind, these reports These are reports that the taxpayers paid for in the first place. H.R. 736 will solve this problem. The bill directs the federal government to compile all congressionally mandated reports into a central location. The Government Publishing Office would be required to establish an online database where agencies would submit congressionally mandated reports. In order to protect sensitive information, the bill allows agencies to redact information in the reports that would otherwise not be releasable to the public under the Freedom of Information Act. The database would provide access to reports free of charge. The reports would be searchable, sortable, and available to be downloaded in bulk. H.R. 736 ensures that these taxpayer-funded reports are transparent and accessible. It will make it easier for both the public and Congress to review and evaluate federal agency activities. Increased transparency under this bill will allow the public to help Congress hold the government accountable. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished member and sponsor of the legislation, Representative Quigley.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you. I will keep my comments brief because this common sense bipartisan bill is simple. H.R. 736 would make all agency reports available to Congress and releasable under FOIA on one website at no cost to the American public. Each year, federal agencies submit thousands of reports to Congress containing a wealth of information that enables the public to better understand how federal agencies are or are not fulfilling their respective missions, from ensuring that the safety of our drugs and food supply to protecting the environment and monitoring the soundness of our financial institutions. Unfortunately, many, if not most, of these reports simply sit collecting dust in the committees they're delivered to, or are posted in numerous and confusing places on dozens of agency websites, rarely to be seen or thought of again. In fact, the only comprehensive list of congressionally mandated reports is printed in paper format each year by the Clerk of the House and is available only by request, provided that you know it exists. My bill would, for the first time, create a single website where the public and members of Congress can easily search, sort, and download all congressionally mandated reports from agencies. Ultimately, this will help us conduct better research and oversight of these agencies, and will allow the public to learn about what agencies are doing with their hard-earned tax dollars. This bill is meant to be a window into the workings of government, and to ensure the government's business is done transparently and is accountable to the people it serves. I urge my colleagues to support this straightforward, common-sense bill and vote yes on H.R. 736. I yield back.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no further speakers. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 736 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Again. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to the bill H.R. 1250 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1250, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 11158 Highway 146 North in Hardin, Texas, as the Lucas Low Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Ruda, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous materials on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I am pleased to join my colleagues in consideration of H.R. 1250 to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 11158 Highway 146 North in Hardin, Texas, as the Lucas Lowe Memorial Post Office. Chief Warrant Officer Lucas Lowe's life was defined by a call to service. On July 6, 2004, Lucas enlisted in the United States Army. He was deployed to Afghanistan for 11 months from 2005 to 2006, and Iraq for 14 months from 2007 to 2008. Lucas later attended Warrant Officer Candidate School at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where he also enrolled in flight school to become an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter pilot. On December 28, 2016, Chief Warrant Officer Lucas Lowe passed away during a training flight with the Army National Guard. Lucas demonstrated in his short life the kind of commitment to service that should be an example to all of us. He leaves behind to cherish his memory, his wife Carney, sons Clayton and Lance, and daughters Allison and Tenley. Naming a post office in Lucas Lowe's honor in Hardin, Texas is a fitting tribute to honor and remember a young man who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to all of us. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I would like to yield 3 minutes to my friend from Texas, Mr. Babin.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1250, a bill to designate U.S. Postal Service facility in Hardin, Texas, as the Lucas Lowe Memorial Post Office. As my colleagues know, to fast track a postal legislation, we collect co-sponsorships from every other member of the state's delegation. And when you come from a state as large as the state of Texas, this can certainly be easier said than done. And although everything is bigger in Texas, I'm proud to inform you that we have the support of all 36 members of the Lone Star State's Texas delegation to honor this American hero, Lucas Maurice Lowe, with the naming of the Memorial Post Office. Chief Warrant Officer Second Lucas Lowe of Hardin, Texas, was tragically lost to us during a training flight just after Christmas in 2016 during his time in the Texas Army National Guard. A hard-working man who loved being in the service, Lowe especially loved to fly. After enlisting in the Army in 2004, Lowe completed an 11-month tour in Afghanistan in 2005 and 6, and a 14-month tour in Iraq in 2007 and 8. He later attended Warrant Officer Candidate School at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where he also attended flight school to become an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter pilot. He was an amazing soldier who faithfully served both God and his country. However, when the world lost Lucas, we lost more than a dedicated patriot. We lost a man who always went out of his way to help lift others' spirits and encourage them to reach for higher success in life. Lucas was a wonderful family man who loved his wife and his children and his family more than anything else. He loved his children more than life itself. He loved camping in the woods and hunting, fishing, campfires, and good music. He enjoyed dancing, playing golf, cooking, and singing to brighten everyone's day. He always had a way of making someone's day better. Admired by all, his courage and dedication made him a natural-born leader. He touched the lives of all who knew him and lived his life with an optimistic spirit, always ready to take on the next big challenge.
Always.
Lucas is survived by his wife, Cammie, and his 5 children, Clayton, Lance, Allison, Logan, and Tenley. And he is dearly, dearly missed throughout the Texas Army Guard and the entire Hardin community and Liberty County, and by those family and friends that he left behind. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And I yield back my
Gentleman from
balance.
Texas yields back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
Close already, please.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam
boy.
Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1250, introduced by Representative Babin. The bill names a post office located in Hardin, Texas, in honor of Army Chief Warrant Officer Lucas Lowe.
I'm in Texas.
Lucas
Who
Lowe
are
joined
these
the United
people?
States Army in 2004. He served an 11-month deployment in Afghanistan, followed by a 14-month deployment in Iraq. While deployed, Lowe served as a field artillery radar operator and then as a paratrooper. When he returned home, Lowe attended Warrant Officer Candidate School and Flight School in Fort Rucker, Alabama. Chief Warrant Officer Lowe was then assigned to the 149th Aviation Regiment in the Texas National Guard. On December 28, 2016, Chief Warrant Officer Lowe lost his life during a training accident.
Get to the good stuff.
Grandfather was a rural postal delivery member of the post office from 1905 to 1944. Out of Henrietta, Texas, he for many years delivered the mail on horseback. One of the biggest days in his life.
I know people in
was when he got a
Henrietta,
Model
Texas.
T.
Henrietta,
He, in fact,
Georgia.
delivered letters right up until the day he died in
Marietta.
1944. You
Good
can
for
read
you.
about him and a lot of other people in the museum, most notably the women trailblazers who built the Postal Service into what it is today. Women like Sarah DeCrow, who in 1792 became the very first woman postmaster, or women like Ethel Hill, who in 1900 became the first woman listed as a full-time rural delivery carrier. Well, this year is the celebration of the city of Tumwater's 150th anniversary. They call that the sesquicentennial. They're sharing many of the stories there about their own women trailblazers.
Yes,
women like
women trailblazers. Yes.
But as a consequence of his sacrifices to this great nation.
Let's see what he got to say.
Measure.
Without objection.
Because I can watch
Madam
this kind of
Speaker.
stuff all
I
day.
yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to join my colleagues in consideration of H.R. 1844 to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 66 Grove Court in Elgin, Illinois, as the Corporal Alex Martinez Memorial Post Office Building. At this time, I would like to yield such time as he may
Memorial Post
consume
Office
to
building.
Representative
I can't.
Kristamurthy.
Thank you, Congressman Ruda. Madam Speaker, I would like to rise in support of my own legislation, H.R. 1844, to designate the facility of the U.S. Postal Service located at 66 Grove Court in Elgin, Illinois, as the Corporal Alex Martinez Memorial Post Office Building. Corporal Alex Martinez, a lifelong Elgin resident, wanted to join the Marine Corps since he was a little boy. From a young age, he yearned to follow in the footsteps of his father, Enrique Martinez.
Bill H.R. 3305. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended and the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to the bill H.R. 2325.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2325, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 100 Calle Alondra and San Juan, Puerto Rico, as the 65th Infantry Regiment Post Office Building.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Ruda, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous materials on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I am pleased to join my colleagues in consideration of H.R. 2325 to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 100 Calle Yolanda and San Juan.
748, the Middle Class Health Benefits Tax Repeal of 2019 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 748, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to repeal the excise tax on high-cost employer-sponsored health coverage.
Here we go.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on this bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 748, the Middle Class Health Benefits Tax Repeal of 2019. After a decade of fiercely debating the merits of the Affordable Care Act, I hope we have turned a corner today and can now focus on strengthening the parts of the law that work in the manner we had intended and changing the parts of the law which is not unusual that we believe could be improved. This legislation, tirelessly championed by Representative Joe Courtney of Connecticut, with 367 bipartisan co-sponsors, addresses the so-called Cadillac tax, a part of the law that had unintended consequences of reducing health care benefits that were provided to certain American workers. More than 181 million Americans currently depend upon employer-sponsored health insurance. That's the majority of the American people, including retirees, low and moderate income families, public sector employees, small business owners, and non-profit workers. While the name Cadillac tax implies this excise tax only applies to luxury health coverage, the truth is it will eventually apply to almost every American with employer-sponsored health insurance. At a time when American families are already worried about the health care costs that apply to them, the Cadillac tax has had the effect of increasing deductibles and out-of-pocket costs as employers make changes in their plans designed to avoid the tax. We have also found that the Cadillac tax affects health plans that have higher numbers of workers with chronic diseases or serious illnesses, that cover more than 1 million women or families, or that offer coverage to part-time workers because premiums for those plans are often higher. This was not the goal of this tax when it was originally included in the ACA. I know because I helped to negotiate and to write the Affordable Care Act. Congress wanted to encourage employers and insurance companies to find ways to offer better coverage at lower costs. And while many actions in the ACA did bend the cost curve, leading to better care and slower cost growth, this excise tax indeed did not. We want employers to cover their workers with robust, meaningful benefits. A good American job with a strong health benefit is part of security. Employers want this for their employees, labor wants this for their members, and American workers and their families want to know they can get the care they need when they need it. This legislation, as I noted earlier, has strong bipartisan support with a diverse group of stakeholder organizations endorsing the legislation, from labor to Chamber of Commerce to patient organizations. If we fail to repeal the Cadillac tax, we will leave working families with less health care coverage, higher out-of-pocket health care costs, and little to no resultant wage increases. So I urge our colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. This is a great day for us, and we worked with Chairman Neal on this and Joe Courtney, and I don't want to really go out on a limb, but it's nice to see a bunch of Irish guys get together. I'm not sure you can say that anymore in the People's House, but get together to make sure that we're protecting so many people who have earned health care through their employer. You know,
wow, he said a bunch of Irish guys.
If you look what happened here in the House, and you were to go back home and you talk to people back home and say, can't you guys get along on anything? Can't you put away these things that you fight over and actually start to talk about the things that help us? Can't you do things like that? We've watched it, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure people are back home and saying, they can't do anything. Well, I'm here to tell you today, that's just not true. You are going to see a bipartisan effort today on a bipartisan bill to make sure that hardworking Americans get to keep their employer-sponsored health care. Those are people in labor unions, those are people in everyday businesses, small businesses, big businesses, all across the board. Because what we're doing today is a move in the right direction. So what we're doing today is truly bipartisan, and we hope it becomes bicameral. Today, you are going to see both Republicans and Democrats come together to do the right thing for the right reasons. And good things are going to come of that. It just doesn't get any better than this, especially at a time when you go back home and people just look at us and say, holy smokes. On the floor of the People's House? You guys can't get along on anything? Well, we are. We are going to get along on something, and we're going to do something that's really big, and we're going to pass H.R. 748, the middle class health benefits tax repeal. It's also known as the Cadillac tax. I happen to be a Cadillac dealer. Cadillac has forever been described as a standard of the world. The healthcare piece we're talking about is the standard of the world, and so many times in the past it was described as this is just too darn generous for generations of people who went to the bargaining table and negotiated as part of their labor agreements health care. Too generous? Too good? And for all those that thought that was a good statement or that was a good idea, I'm going to tell you, that's just too bad because it was terrible. It made no sense. But today we're going to change that. We're going to take the time we have today on the floor to talk about it and to talk to our colleagues and say you all need to be on board with this. And by the way, Joe knows this because we've been working on it for a long time. And Joe, it's your bill this session, but before, especially, that's gone back and forth, right? Depending on who the majority is. But I got to tell you, this is the end of today's talking when it comes to partisan gridlock because it's not going to happen. And much like Mark Twain said, you know, he was overseas one time and in London and somebody printed into the paper that Mark Twain was not only ill, but that he had died. And Mark Twain replied, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." Let's use that today when we talk about the fact that we can't get along here in the People's House. Now, Joe and I have worked hard on this. Last Congress, we had 304 co-sponsors. This Congress, our legislation has more than 370 co-sponsors. That's the majority of both parties, Democrat and Republican. Our bill is going to repeal this onerous tax originally passed as part of the Affordable Care Act that would have assessed on any health plan that would provide more than $10,200 for individual coverage and $27,500 for family coverage. And I deplore the fact that it was called too generous for hardworking Americans to get up every day and go off to work to make sure they can put a roof over the head of their family, food on their table, clothes on the backs of their kids, and somehow plan for their future. If that's a bad benefit, I want to see what a good one looks like. Now, according to researchers, it's projected, I think Chairman Neal just went over some of these numbers, 75% of employer-sponsored health plans would be affected if we allow this tax to stand. That was part of the Affordable Care Act, but it was never enforced. Today, we have a chance to fully do away with it. Just repeal it. Right, Joe? That's what we're trying to get to. And the groups that support this legislation go across the board. There's millions of workers that are waiting for us to do something today to act in their best interest. More than 665 organizations have weighed in support of repealing this tax. It is absolutely an incredible effort that's going to take place today. And I can't say this enough. It is a bipartisan effort by the majority of both parties to get this done for hard-working Americans and protect not only themselves but their families. And it is a benefit of generational negotiations. It's an incredible piece of legislation that we're going to get through today.
Well, we're about to find out. That's all my time I have for this today to share with you. Hopefully you got some kind of education out of it. I will not be keeping this live. I will be putting this on private because I just wanted you guys to actually have an idea and what to look for. So, that's my time for today, all my BK riders. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm out.